Yesterday, something happened in the Pacific that immediately caught the attention of earthquake experts around the world. A magnitude 6 earthquake struck first. Just 60 seconds later, another one hit the exact same area, this time even stronger at magnitude 6.6. That alone was unusual. Then more than a dozen powerful aftershocks followed within just a few hours. A tsunami warning was issued almost instantly across parts of the North Pacific. People waited, expecting the worst, but the wave never came. So what really happened? Was this just a rare earthquake sequence? Or was it a warning that something much bigger could still be building beneath the ocean? That's the part that makes this story so unsettling. The biggest danger may not be what we've already seen. It may be what hasn't happened yet. Right now, seismologists aren't watching this fault because they're trying to scare people. They're watching it because this kind of activity raises questions that nobody can answer with certainty. In this video, we'll break down what happened, why the tsunami never formed, and why experts are still monitoring this fault hour by hour. It all started with what looked like a fairly strong earthquake. A magnitude 6 hit off the eastern coast of Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula. On its own, that would have been a serious event, but not something geologists haven't seen before. Then, exactly 1 minute later, the ground broke again. This time, it was even stronger. A magnitude 6.6 earthquake struck almost the same spot, before the shaking from the first one had even faded. That's the moment experts knew this wasn't an ordinary earthquake sequence. Normally, one big earthquake is followed by smaller aftershocks. That's the pattern scientists expect to see. The fault releases most of its energy in one main event, then slowly settles down over time. But that's not what happened here. Instead of one main shock and a series of weaker aftershocks, there were two large earthquakes back to back, nearly the same size, almost the same location, only 60 seconds apart. Seismologists have a name for this. It's called an earthquake doublet. And while the name sounds technical, the idea is actually pretty simple. The first rupture didn't release all the built-up pressure. The fault was still under stress. Instead of calming down, it immediately pushed another section of the fault past its breaking point. That's what makes a doublet so different. It tells scientists the fault isn't behaving like it normally does. The energy is still moving through the system. One break can trigger another, and once that starts happening, nobody can say with complete confidence where it will stop. That doesn't automatically mean a much bigger earthquake is coming. Most of the time, it doesn't. But it does mean the fault is still active, still adjusting, and still capable of transferring stress to nearby sections. That's the question everyone is watching now. If the first earthquake triggered the second, could the second trigger something else? No one knows the answer yet. And that's exactly why this sequence has the attention of earthquake experts around the world. To understand why this earthquake sequence matters so much, you have to look at where it happened. The quake struck just off the coast of Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula, near the city of Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky. Around 180,000 people live there. It's not just another coastal city. It sits right next to one of the most active and dangerous fault zones on Earth. That location changes everything. These weren't deep earthquakes buried far underground. They were shallow, happening only a few miles beneath the seafloor. And that's what immediately raised concern. When a shallow earthquake hits under the ocean, there's always a chance it could push the seafloor upward. If that happens, the water above it can be lifted too. That's exactly how a tsunami begins. So when two strong earthquakes hit just 1 minute apart, in the same offshore area, scientists couldn't afford to wait. A tsunami warning was issued almost immediately. At that point, nobody knew exactly how the fault had moved. They only knew the conditions were there for something much worse. But the shaking wasn't over. Instead of slowly fading away, the fault kept moving. One after another, more earthquakes rolled through the same area. Magnitude 4.9. Then 5. Another 4.9. A 4.5. Later, a 5.8. Then another, above 5. By the end of the morning, more than a dozen earthquakes measuring 4.5 or higher had hit the same stretch of coastline. That's not what you expect from a fault that's finished releasing energy. Think about it this way. One earthquake is one event. A long string of strong aftershocks is something completely different. It tells you the fault is still adjusting. Stress is still moving underground. The system hasn't fully settled yet. Each new quake may not be as large as the first two, but together, they paint a much bigger picture. This wasn't a single moment that came and went. It was an ongoing sequence, with the Earth's crust continuing to shift hour after hour. For the people living nearby, that means there was no real chance to relax. Just when it felt like the shaking might be over, another jolt arrived. Then another. And every new quake raised the same question again. Is this finally the end? Or is the fault still working its way towards something bigger? That's exactly why scientists stayed focused on this area long after the first earthquakes were over. The moment those earthquakes hit, a tsunami warning went out almost immediately. That wasn't an overreaction. It was exactly what the warning system is designed to do. Here's why. The earthquakes were shallow, and they happened beneath the ocean floor. That's one of the biggest warning signs scientists look for. When a strong quake strikes under the sea, there's no time to wait and see what happens. If the seafloor moves upward, it can lift an enormous amount of water in seconds. That's how a tsunami begins, and nearby coastlines may only have minutes before the first wave arrives. So the system is built to move first and ask questions later. It's always better to warn people early than risk waiting too long. But this time, something unexpected happened. The tsunami never came. The ocean stayed mostly calm. After more data came in, the warning was canceled. To a lot of people, that probably looked like a false alarm. But that's not really what happened. The warning wasn't wrong. It was based on the information available at the time. The earthquake had all the basic conditions that could produce a tsunami. The only thing no one knew right away was exactly how the fault had moved beneath the seafloor. And that's what made all the difference. Not every earthquake pushes the ocean upward. Some faults mainly slide sideways instead of lifting the ground. When the movement is mostly horizontal, the water above it barely changes. Even a powerful earthquake can shake the ground without creating a destructive wave. That's what scientists believe happened here. The fault appears to have moved more sideways than upward. It's also possible the rupture occurred just deep enough that it didn't lift the seafloor very much. Either way, the ocean simply wasn't displaced enough to generate a major tsunami. In other words, the fault was dangerous. The conditions looked serious, but the details ended up falling on the safer side this time. That's an important difference. This doesn't mean the fault is harmless, and it doesn't mean future earthquakes will behave the same way. The very same fault could produce a much larger tsunami if a future rupture lifts the seafloor instead of sliding across it. So the calm ocean wasn't proof that the threat never existed. It was proof that, this time, the Earth moved in just the right way to avoid something much worse. Sometimes the smallest details underground make the biggest difference above the surface. To really understand why scientists reacted so quickly, you have to understand what's happening deep beneath Kamchatka. This region sits on what's called the Kuril-Kamchatka subduction zone. It may sound like a complicated name, but the idea is actually pretty simple. Two massive tectonic plates are constantly pushing against each other. The Pacific plate is slowly sliding beneath the edge of the Eurasian plate. It's not moving fast, only about 80 millimeters a year. That's roughly the speed your fingernails grow. But here's the important part. The plates don't slide smoothly. Most of the time, they get stuck. Friction locks them together, even though they're still trying to move. Year after year, the pressure keeps building. The rocks bend and store more and more energy, almost like stretching a giant spring tighter and tighter. Nothing seems to happen for years, sometimes even decades. Then, without much warning, that locked section finally gives way. In just a few seconds, all that stored energy is released. That's the earthquake people feel on the surface. This cycle is always the same. The plates lock, pressure builds, the fault finally breaks. Then the whole process starts over again. That's why this part of the world is so different from many other places. The Kuril-Kamchatka subduction zone isn't just another fault line. It's one of the most active earthquake-producing regions anywhere on Earth. Some of the strongest earthquakes ever recorded have happened along this very boundary. So when scientists saw two large earthquakes, followed by a long chain of powerful aftershocks, they didn't treat it like random background activity. They recognized exactly where it was happening. This is a fault that's been storing energy for a very long time. It's part of a tectonic system that never stops moving, even when everything looks quiet on the surface. That's why every new earthquake here gets so much attention. It's not just about the size of one event. It's about what that event says about the stress that's still building underground. The Earth is always moving beneath Kamchatka. Most of the time, we simply don't notice it. But every once in a while, the fault reminds everyone that it never really stopped. One question always comes up after a big earthquake. Was that the main event, or was it just the beginning? That's where the idea of a foreshock comes in. A foreshock is an earthquake that looks like the biggest one at first, but later turns out to be a warning before an even larger quake. The truth is, no one knows it's a foreshock until after something bigger happens. Most of the time, a strong earthquake is exactly what it looks like the main shock. The aftershocks gradually fade, the fault settles down, and life slowly returns to normal. But every now and then, that's not how the story ends. That's why this earthquake doublet has scientists paying such close attention. Think about what happened. The first magnitude 6 earthquake struck. Just 1 minute later, a magnitude 6.6 hit almost the exact same area. That tells us something important. The first rupture changed the stress inside the fault enough to trigger another section almost immediately. That's not speculation. That's how faults can behave. When one part of a fault breaks, it doesn't just release energy. It also shifts pressure onto nearby sections. Sometimes those sections hold. Sometimes they don't. In this case, they didn't. And that's the question scientists are asking now. If the first earthquake triggered the second, could the second place even more stress on another locked section of the fault? Nobody knows. That uncertainty is exactly why experts are watching this sequence so closely. Now, it's important to keep this in perspective. No serious scientist is saying a magnitude 9 earthquake is about to happen. Anyone making that claim is going far beyond what the evidence supports. At the same time, no responsible scientist is dismissing this sequence either. This fault has already shown that one rupture can trigger another. That's exactly what happened with the doublet. So the possibility of additional activity, while still small, can't simply be ignored. Right now, the most likely outcome is still the same. The aftershocks should gradually become weaker and less frequent until the fault settles down. But this is one of the most powerful subduction zones on Earth. Its history reminds everyone to stay cautious, not because disaster is expected, but because nature doesn't always follow the outcome we hope for. That's really where things stand today. There's no reason to panic, but there's every reason to keep watching. To understand why this earthquake sequence is getting so much attention, we need to go back more than 70 years. In 1952, this very fault produced one of the largest earthquakes ever recorded. It reached a magnitude of 9. Even today, it remains one of the most powerful earthquakes in modern history. But the shaking wasn't the worst part. The earthquake pushed the seafloor upward with tremendous force. That movement displaced an enormous amount of ocean water, creating a massive tsunami. Within minutes, the waves slammed into the Kuril Islands, destroying entire coastal communities and taking countless lives. And the story didn't end there. The tsunami kept moving across the Pacific. Traveling at the speed of a jet, it crossed thousands of miles of open ocean before reaching Hawaii. Even that far away, the waves were strong enough to damage boats, flood shorelines, and remind everyone that an earthquake in one part of the world can affect places an ocean away. That's why Kamchatka is different. When scientists see unusual activity here, they don't have to imagine the worst-case scenario. They've already seen it happen. The history of this fault is real. The destruction is well documented. The tsunami wasn't a theory. It wasn't a computer simulation. It happened, and people paid for it with their lives. That history changes how every new earthquake is viewed. It doesn't mean another magnitude 9 earthquake is about to happen. History doesn't repeat itself on a schedule, but it does remind us what this fault is capable of under the right conditions. That's why experts aren't overreacting. And they're not ignoring what's happening either. They're comparing today's earthquake sequence with everything this fault has done before. They're asking one simple question. Is this just another normal release of stress? Or is it part of something larger? No one has that answer yet. But one thing is certain. The reason scientists continue watching Kamchatka isn't driven by fear or speculation, it's driven by experience. This fault has already shown the world what it can do. That's exactly why every unusual movement here deserves careful attention. Sometimes, the best warning about the future isn't a prediction, it's history. So, what are scientists actually watching now? At this point, they're not trying to predict the exact day or hour of another earthquake. That's simply not possible. Instead, they're watching how this entire sequence behaves over time. The first thing they look at is the aftershocks. After a major earthquake, aftershocks usually follow a familiar pattern. They come fast at first, then gradually become weaker and less frequent. That's how most earthquake sequences naturally wind down. So every few hours, scientists compare the new data to that pattern. Are the earthquakes becoming smaller? Are they happening less often? Or is the fault still releasing energy at the same pace? Those answers matter far more than any single earthquake by itself. The second thing they're watching is the size of the largest aftershock. There's a general rule that works surprisingly well. The biggest aftershock is usually about 1 magnitude smaller than the main earthquake. It isn't perfect, but it's a useful guide. In this case, the main event reached magnitude 6.6. That means scientists expected the largest aftershock to be somewhere around the mid-5 range. Instead, a magnitude 5.8 showed up. That's not dramatically larger, but it is a little stronger than expected. And when you're dealing with one of the world's most active fault zones, even small differences get people's attention. The third thing they're tracking is how the earthquakes are spread across the fault. Are they staying in one area, or are they beginning to move into neighboring sections? That helps scientists understand whether the fault is settling down or if stress is being transferred somewhere else. So far, most of the sequence still looks fairly normal. The overall pattern is consistent with what scientists often see after a strong earthquake. That's reassuring. But the 5.8 aftershock is one reason no one is ready to look away just yet. It doesn't prove something bigger is coming. It also doesn't prove the danger is over. It simply means the fault is still being watched very carefully. That's really the key takeaway. Science isn't about guessing. It's about following the evidence as it changes. Right now, the evidence suggests this sequence is gradually settling down. But until the aftershocks continue to fade the way they're expected to, experts will keep monitoring every new event, not because they're expecting the worst, because that's exactly what careful science is supposed to do. At the end of the day, the biggest lesson isn't about trying to predict the next earthquake. No one can do that. Even the best scientists in the world can't tell you exactly when the ground will move again. What we can do is be ready. If you live near the coast and a powerful earthquake knocks you off balance, or the shaking goes on much longer than normal, don't wait for your phone to buzz or for an official warning to appear. Move to higher ground as soon as you can. The earthquake itself is your first warning. That's one lesson history has taught over and over again, especially in places that have experienced devastating tsunamis. When every minute counts, acting quickly can make all the difference. It's also important not to get distracted by rumors. After every major earthquake, the internet fills up with theories about solar storms, secret weapons, or man-made earthquakes. There's no credible scientific evidence supporting any of those claims. What happened here has a much simpler explanation. The Pacific Plate has been pushing beneath the Eurasian Plate for millions of years. That slow movement builds stress deep underground until the fault finally breaks. It's a natural process, powerful, unpredictable, and far older than human civilization. For now, the most likely outcome is that this earthquake sequence will continue to fade. But this fault has earned the world's attention because of what it's capable of, not because of fear, but because of history. And sometimes, the smartest thing we can do isn't trying to predict nature. It's understanding it and being ready when it reminds us just how powerful it really is.